Chased by a Uber driver. I was coming home from taking a train for a work trip and it was 11. I would usually travel the next day but had to be home early for a family thing. The train station where I lived at the time was outside and had no security whatsoever, so granted I already was a little bit on edge. After waiting 20 minutes for an Uber all alone, I was relieved to see my Uber driver. He had an accent and was from a Middle Eastern country, and the first thing he asked was if I was too. But I often get mistaken for being different nationalities, so it felt normal. I politely said no, and at first everything was normal. We made small talk since the drive was long, but then he started making odd comments saying I was beautiful, asking if I had an American boyfriend and if my parents wanted me married. I dodged his questions, but then as we were 5 minutes away from my apartment he asked if I was doing anything that night. It was a Friday. I said no and I didn't plan on it. He then asked if I lived alone. I do, but I was getting scared, so I said that I had 3 roommates and they were expecting me. That seemed to make him stop and he remained silent the whole ride. I then get notified I had a package. Unfortunately, my apartment would charge if you didn't retrieve the packages after a certain time frame. As soon as we reach my apartment, I get out and use my keycard to go to the package room, which was in a separate room from my apartment entrance. I look outside and he's still parked out front looking around. The way the apartment works is that you have to go outside to go to the actual entrances. One entrance is stairs, the other with the elevator was in the parking garage. I take a deep breath holding my package and start to run. He gets out and starts to run chasing me. Using my keycard, I make it to the stairs entrance and slam the door and run up the stairs. As I get into my room, I looked out my window and saw him still outside his car. Being on the 3rd floor, my lights were on and he looked right at my window. He stayed parked the whole night and then eventually drove away. I reported him on Uber and was extremely cautious the whole week, but I still don't know what he was planning to do, and am grateful my parents made me do running as a kid. So creepy Uber driver, let's never meet again. Uber stalker. Last year I was on vacation in Southern Europe with a large group of friends. We have been there a while, and always took an Uber from our rented house to the city, which had very nice bars and clubs. The thing with Uber is, it allows very cheap and flexible transport, but it also opened up the door to a lot of creeps. I've had Uber drivers who are super cool, but also extremely drugged up road ragers who drive like maniacs and think they're impressive, and it is always the worst once an attractive woman sits in the car. It feels like a lot of total creeps think, now that I have her here in this situation where she can't flee, she is forced to talk to be nice to me. For that very reason the guys of our group always use their phone to call the Uber, so no creep picks the ride specifically because a female name popped up. Some of my friends even use male fake names because of that, but the guy we had that day was by far the worst. It is late evening, and Uber picks us up and drives me, 27M, 27M, 25F, 24F to the desired old town where we plan to go clubbing drink. While driving, the driver constantly looks at the 2 women in the backseat via the mirror. They only told me this afterwards. He kept starting conversations, but basically only addressed the girls who left answering to the guys, who gave short non-detailed answers. Basically signaling that we don't want to talk to. Don't think he needs to know our plans. To us he seemed way too pushy, and he wasn't really that big on hygiene. Giving off the classic, this exactly the scenario why we don't like booking Ubers vibe. Meanwhile, we can't wait to arrive at our destination and get out of this uncomfortable, but not super horrible, situation. But that shit did not feel this great, when this guy didn't stop on the road, but instead pulled into a parking spot. He started fumbling with his phone and we were like, "Aight, weird, but let's get out," and left the car. To our surprise, the guy then turned the car off and got out as well. We saw that red flag and just started walking away towards the bar area of the town without saying a word. Cars can't enter the old town. After 400 feet. Once we reached the gates, we stopped because this was the meeting spot for the other half of our group, who took a separate Uber. And found out that this guy was fucking following us and stopped as well. You know, the classic circle people form while talking, where one guy is just kinda standing next to it because people don't let him in. Yeah, we did that. We started making conversation about how long the others will take to get here, where they are right not, etc. And this guy keeps throwing in comments like he is part of the posse. Oh cool, even more people. This must be great evening, broken English. But not that bad. Then we texted our friends in group chat that we are changing the meeting place to this bar, because the fucking Uber driver is following us around and we want to lose him. So one of us started leading the group at a quick pace through the streets. They are very small, lots of people, high old town buildings all around them. We make turns at every corner trying to lose the guy, but he follows. Finally we reached a big plaza where there were hundreds of people closely together, basically queuing to enter the narrow street up ahead. We pushed through like rude douchebags. and successfully lost the guy. Finally, we could head straight to the bar after our detour and linked up with the other part of our group. 2 hours pass. Life is all good. We decide to head to another bar a bit further away, because the drinks and prices kinda sucked in this one. We had 2 drinks in that bar, and guess who walks through the door and stands next to the table? That guy. Hey guys. At this point, a friend 28M who is good at communicating, and frankly quite big, tells the guy that we want to keep to ourselves and have no interest in hanging out with him. Please leave us alone. Fortunately, the guy says it is no problem and leaves, unfortunately at around 3 a.m., while dancing in the crowd at a club. The same guy announced his presence by tenderly pressing his body against the back of one of the girls 24F who he has been staring at through the mirror in the car. The girl's boyfriend 27M recognizes the guy, gets angry as fuck, grabs him by the collar and essentially tells him that if he keeps following us, he will get the shit kicked out of him. A bouncer sees this and approaches them. I start talking to the bouncer, who was super annoyed by anyone intervening at first, but after hearing how this guy stalked us from his car to this club, he just asks the Uber guy a few questions, then proceeds to throw him out. We stayed a bit longer than we wanted, in hopes of him not waiting for us. After that, we reported the guy for being a creep in the app and called another Uber, which thankfully wasn't him. Uber driver senses an opportunity once he sees women, gets out with us and follows us around bars and clubs even though he was unwelcome. Psycho Uber. A few weeks ago, me, 23F, and a friend, 24F, planned to go to an event together. Since we only had free time after work, we decided to get an Uber so we wouldn't take too long to arrive and could enjoy more. The first half of the ride was really normal, seemed like a normal, polite dude. But as soon as we got to the highway, his attitude changed. He seemed a lot more irritated. Me and my friend didn't pay much attention though and kept chatting between us. Our attention was drawn when he started shouting with another driver. He turned to us and said he was going to pull over. I tried objecting, but he ignored and pulled over anyway. He reached out for the glove compartment and pulled a gun. Important to note that guns are illegal in my country. We were just watching this unfold with hold breaths, and when the other guy drove away, we let out a sigh of relief. But then, we were still stuck in a car with a crazy man with a gun. After that, he went back to driving and apologized to us, saying that the guy was tailgating him. I let out an, "Oh, got it." He kept talking, "That guy is lucky that you 2 girls are here, or else I would have followed him and shoot him in the face." Sleazy idiot. I look over to my friend. She's in shock and paralyzed. I'm in shock too, but trying to keep my cool because the last thing I want to is to get him annoyed at us. If he was willing to shoot that guy for tailgating, I didn't want to know what he would do to us if I said the wrong thing. "No, it's okay. I understand," I say, trying to appease him. "These guys need to be taught a lesson," he continued while I just agreed with my head. "I did that before, you know. We just trapped the guy in an empty street and when he leaves the car, bang. Did he just admit to murder?" was the only thing running through my mind, but I managed to keep calm and just agreed with him the rest of the way. He did deliver us in the right place with no more incidents. I waited a few weeks to report, since he had my home address and wouldn't be hard to figure out who reported him. Nobody showed up in my home with a gun, at least until now, and Uber has answered my report saying that they started an investigation. Hope this guy doesn't do this to anyone else. Strange Uber ride. This one is fairly tame, but this is my story. About 3-ish years ago, I was out with a girlfriend celebrating Cinco de Mayo. My husband had to work early the following day, so he did not come along. At around 2 a.m., I called an Uber to go home. I'd been using the service by then for several years and had never had an issue. I'm a pretty friendly gal, so, initially, the driver's questions didn't really sound any alarms. He asked stuff like, "Why are you alone? Aren't you married? Where is your husband?" I felt fairly confident that he'd back off once I confirmed I was married. As we were driving down a fairly desolate stretch of road, he started to drive really slowly. At this point, I was beginning to feel uneasy. There were no other cars, no reason to reduce speed. He noticed that I was keeping my eyes on him when he looked back through the rear view mirror. He suddenly stopped the car and got out. I immediately unbuckled my seatbelt and jumped out of the car too. I just yelled out, "What the fuck are you doing?" He mumbled something along the lines of, "I thought I heard my tire." "You didn't hear the tire." I was like, "No. You should never just get out of the car." The strange thing is that he didn't seem wigged out that I had just exited his vehicle. He got back and ready to complete the ride. At this point, my options were, 1. Get back in without buckling in and keeping my hand on the lock/handle, or 2. Stay on the side of the desolate road, alone, at 2-something a.m. and wait for another car to pick me up. I chose option 1 as I pretended to call my husband, who was totally sleeping, to let him know I was 10 minutes away. This next part is where it surprisingly takes an odder turn. As I'm riding, desperate to be dropped off at home, police sirens go off behind us. The driver panics, looks through the mirror and starts going on about how the warrants they have are false and how his license should be valid and it's not his fault if it isn't. The cops ask him to step out, realize he's in the middle of a ride so ask me to step out too. They search him and his car and arrest him on the spot and take him to jail. His license was also expired for 2 years. WTF Uber, I asked why they pulled him over and they tell me, turn without a signal. I asked them if they'd drive me home and they told me they weren't a taxi service. By then, I was on a much more vibrant street with well-lit sidewalks. Called another Uber to take me home. Night ended without incident, so, creepy Uber driver and rude cops who wouldn't escort a woman home past 2 in the morning, let's not meet. I escaped an Uber kidnapper, sigh. So after crying just a little bit after looking at crime scenes on the internet, I think it might be time to tell this story. It's just one of those moments when I randomly start thinking about it in a more serious mood than usual. It's gonna be long, so this happened about 4 months ago now, maybe more but I really don't know for sure. Anyway, I was 19 years old, I've turned 20 by now, mid-February, and was going home from university after classes. I usually take my keys with me but around that time, I had lost them and my mom was yet to take me get a new copy. I remember I kept insisting but she wouldn't listen, so what I did was knock on the door to get my younger brother's attention so he'd come and let me in but my mom also took his keys and just left him there locked up as well. I asked my brother to pass me my charger from my room and I called one of my aunties to see if I could go hang out at her workplace in the meantime. She said yes and then told me to call an Uber that she'd be paying for as soon as I got there and that's what I did. Now, the Uber didn't pick me up exactly at home, it was in the house across the street instead, no special reason, it just did. The moment I saw the guy, he gave me kind of a weird vibe but I also tend to be paranoid every time I so much as hop on a taxi, so I just got in, rolled down the window and kept a grip on both of my phones. It all seemed relatively normal until we got to the area where my aunt's workplace was. This was a convenience store at her home in a housing, I think that's what you call it. When there's like a private division. I don't know but condominium didn't sound right, he just completely drove past it and claimed he was following the GPS when I asked him about it. But he wouldn't let me see said GPS. He seemed to know exactly where he was going. Now, I was kinda doomed from the beginning cause I don't know directions and I could only rely on the driver being a decent person and recognizing the area, which I did, but wherever he was taking me, I had no idea. I remember seeing this fountain that I could recognize from when mom drove to my uncle's place but that was like way farther away from my aunt's place. By now, I was kind of thinking of what to do cause this guy drove past a fuck ton of empty housings and a couple of them even seemed to be still under construction. Then he stopped near a place that looked like the end of civilization. We were literally on a hill and then he turned off the car. I got lucky in so many ways. Looking back on it, my phone had no credit. As soon as I thought of that, my aunt called me and asked, "Where are you?" And I literally felt my heart drop because I had no idea and this dude was just staring at me. I said I didn't know and asked him, "Hey, where did you take me?" And he replied with, "I wouldn't know what to tell you, kid." That was enough for me. I grabbed my backpack and opened the door real quick with a loud, "That's fine. I'll see myself out," and hauled us like I hadn't in a very long time. I remember even being afraid of carrying my backpack on the back in case he'd chase me and pull on it so I was holding it in my hand with my hoodie wrapped around my waist as I thought of where to hide. I thought of knocking on someone's door but for some reason, that didn't seem safe to me at the moment. I remember telling my aunt not to hang up because he was still following me on the car. Then I saw an empty barren surrounded by concrete walls and a strong bar gate except there was enough space under the gate to crawl in, so I literally threw the backpack and then crawled under. There was a huge electric control box and I opened it to crouch inside and hide, my aunt still on the phone. She, my other aunt and my uncle were all on a call with each other, putting credit on my phone and asking for my Lyft location through WhatsApp cause I had no idea where I was, literally in the middle of nowhere. I waited there for like 2 hours and this guy wouldn't leave. I even had to go pee outside the box and immediately ran back inside. There were even tiny spiders and old honeycombs, so I was also fighting both my arachnophobia and trypophobia. At some point, I'm guessing the guy left and my uncle got there in his truck. He didn't know where I was, so he kept honking and telling me to tell him when I could hear it closer. And then I finally did and got out. For a while I thought maybe this had been a misunderstanding and I just jumped out of some guy's car like a maniac without even paying him. But then when I got home after staying at my aunt's pharmacy for a while until my mom, who still didn't know much about what had happened, picked me up, I checked the Uber app and not only did it say I had already paid, but it also said I made it to my destination, so I ruled that out. I had told my aunts not to tell mom about it because she goes insane at the minor inconvenience, so telling her this would only freak her out and she wouldn't be any help. I only let her know when I called her to come get me and on our way to get a copy of that key. Because of course, something bad had to happen until she actually listened to me, and nowadays she always puts credit on my phone. Anyway, so that's what went down. I had to Indiana Jones that shit twice, and to this day, my family brags about how I was able to keep myself perfectly composed and react quickly, which I'm still shocked about. I remember seeing broken glass and metal bars laying around and telling my aunt, if I'm going down, I'm taking him with me, in a joking manner because her blood sugar levels were fucking her over. On our way home, my mom told me I wasn't in hysterics because I was in shock and that it had hit me the next day. It didn't. I kept going around as normal, but last week she brought it up again and asked if I didn't think I was gonna die. I said of course, but that I also knew freaking out would only either make me easier target or just not help at all anyway. When I remember it, more than scared, I feel angry. I could have been one of the many girls who just disappear and are later found dead on a random hill or ditch, and I can't say I suffer survivor's guilt because in all honesty I don't, but I can't help but think that could have been me whenever another kid or teenager is on the news as missing or found dead. It really could have gone terribly wrong. My parents believe this guy was a rookie who maybe felt sorry for me and let me go, because if he had wanted to, he could have hurt me with some sort of weapon or just tried to kill me right then and there. I don't even know anymore. I sent his profile to all the girls I know so that if they ever happen to get him as their Uber driver they can cancel. Since then, I don't take Ubers anymore, wherever this guy is right now. I don't want to be ever again. Extra, I actually took pictures of the place where I was hiding until my uncle found me. I would attach them, but apparently, you can't post any sort of image in this community. My Uber driver took me to an abandoned building and followed me out of the car. I work in food service, front of house, so, in the early days of the pandemic with restaurants closed, I was taking work wherever I could find it. An old friend clued me into a medical office that needed someone to come in and do a bit of light filing. I was able to go in at night to limit direct contact with people, so I jumped at the opportunity right away. Ironically, the medical office job had been the safest I'd been offered thus far. COVID-wise, I wanted to avoid the bus if I could, due to crowds, so decided to swing for a rideshare app. It's not all that expensive in my area and I really didn't want a virus. I headed in at almost 3 a.m. because it was after the cleaning crew had left. I was kicking myself for being so cautious, though, because I was exhausted. I stumbled onto the block looking for my ride, and to my tired self's great relief the car spotted me almost immediately and pulled up asking Uber. While I cluelessly wandered up and down the street searching. The ride was taking a while, but I'd only just moved here last year, so I'm not familiar with all of the surrounding areas and thought nothing of it. I was pretty alert at first, so was trying to pass the time playing games on my phone and stuff, but the car didn't have a compatible phone charger and I wasn't sure the building would have one, so I wanted to save my battery to be able to call a ride back. I shut my phone down into airplane mode and eventually drifted off from a combination of tiredness and boredom. I don't often take rideshare, so being alone with a strange driver often put me a bit on edge, but this guy had a pretty boring car and a very standard look about him. He looked a little like my brother even. Young, clean kept, listening to jazz, nothing that screamed you need to micromanage this trip. When we arrived, the driver tried to wake me up by calling to me from the front, but I was in too deep of a sleep and couldn't fully distinguish it from my dream. Finally he awkwardly jimmied my leg to wake me up and kept saying, Mayim, we're here now." I was embarrassed that I'd been that out of it, so just gave a hurried thanks and booked it out of the car and into the building. As I looked around, I began to realize nothing was what I had expected of an office park. I had seen a street view of the building when I first looked up the business, and it had appeared to be a strip mall plaza. The further I went, the more loudly alarm bells were ringing in my gut. The structure was semi-dilapidated and it was pitch black dark past the entryway. I expected some lights to be off in the nighttime, but not to the whole building. I skittered across the concrete foundation comprising what was left of the lobby area, told myself they must just be renovating, and followed signs for the stairs. After what felt like ages but was likely just a few minutes, all I had passed was construction equipment, a couple locked doors, and some smashed windows. I was certain I was not going to find a medical office and figured maybe I had mixed up the address. I took out my phone to double check, but once I got it out of airplane mode, I could barely get a signal. I kept moving around in the building, pacing, looking for a stronger signal. I eventually confirmed in my texts that I had written down the correct address just by scrolling back, which didn't require service. Since I had only been inside for a few minutes at most, I figured I should try and get in touch with the driver, because if I entered the correct address then it was only fair he should continue my ride to the correct place and save me the added fees of calling a second trip. Considering this was all his mix-up, the app was taking forever to load with my slow service. But before I could get to a cloud of reception, I heard a rustling sound in the lower level of the building. I was on the top floor and the only stairwell I was aware of was the one I had taken up. So it would force me into the middle of the building. There was no way to exit the situation without encountering whoever was downstairs. In an abandoned building in the latest hours of the night, I figured the chances were high that it was a tweaker, and I had no desire to try slipping past a tweaker, especially when it was late enough that they were probably on something so jumpy and on edge. I tried to get a text out to a group of friends with my address and a request to call 911 to help get me from the property, because I didn't feel safe walking in that neighborhood at night and didn't have enough reception to call a new ride, but the message wasn't sending. Reception was too weak, so I gave up on getting my phone going and started checking for another stairwell, or even window with balconies or dumpsters that could be used to exit the second floor as a last resort. In the event whoever was downstairs came upstairs, I scrambled over to a door with a stairs sign on it, but the stairs were completely dilapidated and it was essentially just a straight drop down to the first floor. At that point the worst case scenario began to unfold. I heard whoever was downstairs begin making their way up the stairs. I thought fast and figured based on my walkabout the floor was basically a giant loop, so I would have to wait for whoever this was to come up the stairs, wait for them to come all the way up, and then sprint the opposite direction of wherever they were going and try to get down the stairs and out of the building in time to make it to the road without encountering them. I was not anticipating being chased or anything, but didn't want to piss off a druggie or have a homeless person who might be living there feel as though I'd trespassed and become hostile towards me, or have any sort of interaction that could possibly occur at that hour in an abandoned industrial park. I held my breath for what felt like 5 minutes but was likely closer to just 30 seconds, and the person appeared at the top of the stairs. To my great relief, it was just the Uber driver. I figured he had come back for me, realizing he had left me in the wrong spot, a place that could have worked out to be dangerous, so I came out from the beam I was hidden behind and started to wave him down. But then I processed, there was no way for him to realize this had been the wrong address. My stomach lurched forward and my blood chilled to slush. I made eye contact with him very briefly and he was completely calm and composed, but breathing pretty heavily, and blocking the stairwell down. On a normal, rational day as an outside observer I could think of a dozen innocent reasons he might have returned. But in the moment, standing across from him, I just knew in my gut that this was someone with ill intent. I can't remember much more from the ensuing few minutes. Operating solely on muscle memory and instinct, I Superman dove for the second stairwell's opening and just let myself fall down the drop. Thankfully I don't think he'd seen where I'd gone at first, and though I was in too much pain to know it then, plenty was bruised but nothing was completely broken. I scrambled up and threw myself at anything that seemed like it could be the door. It was too dark to tell, I was disoriented from the fall, and I wasn't in a calm enough mindset to think to use my phone flashlight. Plus, in hindsight, some part of me probably knew it would call too much attention to my location. Just before I was able to reach the door, it flew open with a blinding light beaming straight into my eyes. My first thought, though not totally coherent, was there's another one of these guys. And I stumbled backwards, trying to find something to hide behind. Before I could, a voice called out. "All right, this is the Name-Off-Town Police Department. Everyone get on your knees with your hands in the air." I didn't believe it was the police at first. I was in such a fight or flight mode and had already committed to flight that I continued looking for ways to get out, but he kept shining the flashlight right at me as I teetered around and yelled, "Hey," I said on the ground, "right now. Hands out where I can see them." He sounded so authoritative that I just automatically did exactly as he asked. He approached me and finally shined the light away from me. It took a second to get my night vision, but once I did I could see he was really a police officer. I tried to explain what was happening, but first he started asking me all these questions, and that, combined with what had just happened, and my fear of the driver coming back, all snowballed into my being unable to form a single articulate sentence. He was even asking easy questions too, like, "Can you tell me your name? Do you have any knives, needles, or anything that could poke or cut me? Would you rather talk in here or outside?" And my total stunned babbling in response at first led him to believe I was on something. He directed me out to his car, and once I was safely out of the building, I was able to start getting my bearings just a little. I sat on the edge of the back seat of the squad car, with the door open facing out. While he stood across from me and asked the same questions again, the first thing I could think to ask was, "Did my friends call you? What did they tell you?" And he explained no, nobody called him. He was patrolling the area and noticed a car idling outside of this building that's known to be condemned, and nobody's supposed to be inside, and when they are, they're not up to no good. He was launching into a speech about how if I'd gone to shoot up or meet a John he had resources he could direct me to and that this was not an ideal place to do either of those things and asking if I had somewhere safe to stay that night. But I was stuck on something else he'd said. Finally it all clicked. The car. I spilled my whole rideshare story in a frantic word vomit. He looked around and the car wasn't there anymore. The officer guessed the guy had driven off while we were talking inside the building. He asked me all the details I remembered and I told him, but there weren't many. I'd been too tired when the ride started to track much. But the officer realized I could pull up my Uber app and get all the information. There wasn't really enough reception there, even outdoors, so we sped down the road and once I had enough bars the app roared to life and I had 4 missed notifications from Uber. They said, "Hello, I've arrived. And I don't see you. Can you confirm the pickup address is correct? And I am flashing my hazards. And finally, unfortunately your driver had to cancel." At first I thought the driver was so cunning as to pick me up while sending these fake messages and canceling so the GPS wouldn't track us. Knowing I wouldn't notice because I was asleep with my phone off, and exonerating himself, but instead I checked the car details, checked again, and it was definitely not the same driver. The person who'd driven me there had not been my Uber. My driver was somewhere else on the street when this guy pulled up to me. The policeman took my statement and said they would keep an eye out for the guy, but the best I could give them to go off of was basically young-looking Caucasian man with brown hair, sideburns, goatee, and 4-door sedan. Wearing a zip-up sweatshirt. Maybe had a hood. Which is, like, 1 out of every 4 guys in this city. I feel so blessed to have survived this near miss. Suffice it to say, I do not take rideshare services anymore. Quadruple check your license plate and driver name. You just never know. Conspiracy theory ex-con Uber driver tried to take me to his bunker. I was recently reminded of this story and love reading the posts here and figured I'd share it. I don't know how having a story verified works, but I have a couple videos of this experience and if any mods want to confirm I can do that, so on to the story. This all happened in August 2017. I was 23 and just moved back into my mom's place, which happened to be about 30 minutes from my nearest friend's place. My car broke down so I was Ubering everywhere I had to go. I went down to my friend's place to help them move. Went to Target to grab some champagne and orange juice because I apparently hated myself and thought an imminent hangover was a great idea. Fast forward to that night and of course I'm doubled over throwing up with a migraine and can barely lift my head and I have to work the next day's morning shift. My friends have no idea where they have any sort of over-the-counter meds for headaches, but of course the stoner of the house offers me an edible. Now I may have killed the bottle of champagne, but I haven't touched marijuana in years. I ate half of that edible and waited about 45 minutes to feel better and called my Uber. I was getting picked up in an apartment complex and of course had to walk to the front to find the driver because I've never met an Uber driver that can locate any address with accuracy. I get in the back seat and he turns around to introduce himself. This guy has a southern drawl that would make molasses seem like water. It was at this moment I realized I fucked up. I told him I had a migraine and just wanted to go home. He pulls out a bottle of water that was already opened and some random pills and tells me these should make me feel much better. So of course I politely grab them and then proceed to stuff them into the seat and shove the water bottle in the pocket in front of me. We begin our 30-ish minute journey to my mom's apartment. If it weren't for Mary Jane coming along for the ride I probably would have hopped out right then. This guy starts off the drive by telling me prison stories and then somehow it delves into how the world is going to end by December 20-something of 2017. Every few sentences he's now bringing up his bunker. He asked me constantly if I just wanted to head there instead of home. My high-ass self kept telling him I'd love to, but I have work so I can't. Maybe next time I guess. He's cycling through conspiracies from the earth is flat to Kandahar, Afghanistan giants. He says, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but look up Kandahar, Afghanistan on YouTube. Also, in case y'all didn't know this, the world ain't heliocentric. Just get a pair of binoculars, you'll see. At some point he's telling me that he has an arsenal of guns. He asks me if I have guns and my liberal Milniles tells him I have lots of guns. He grows opium at his bunker. And again asks me to come with him. I'm panicked. Texting everyone I know, sharing my location, and started recording. I managed to get about 7 minutes in total of this 30-minute drive on film, so we're getting closer and closer to the exit he needs to take to drop me off. He's still in the far left lane of this 4-lane highway. I kept telling him to move over and the exit is coming up and this creepy-ass fucker keeps telling me how well stocked his bunker is. He misses my exit, finally I lose it and start screaming at him to get me home and that my mom is waiting for me and I have work tomorrow. Like my job means anything to this psycho or even me. He finally does get off the exit after I started kicking his seat threatening to jump out of the moving car. I ran out of his car so fast when he hit the red light outside of the apartment complex. As soon as I got inside I tried telling my mom what happened, but she brushed it off and was more disappointed that I told her I had taken an edible. The next morning I coherently explained what actually happened and showed her the videos and we reported him to Uber. I still take Ubers on occasion, but I will never use one while alone and inebriated ever again. And this is the reason I don't consume THC. The universe knows when I'm high and things like this happen to me, so creepy Uber driver wanting to take me to his bunker, let's not meet ever again.